Hey gang, we're back at Greenwood Memory Lawn Cemetery here in Central Phoenix. This is part 2. There may be a part 3, there may be a part 4, but if you've missed part 1, I'll put the link up here in the corner and in the description below for part 1. And we're a little series here at this old cemetery, going to the graves of just the common people. Not anybody famous, just people that we have found. I say we, Deb, again, I mentioned Deb, my ancestry helper, has been helping me with a lot of this. But I've identified people a lot from just interesting pictures that I came across. Who were they? What were their lives? And some of them are just not big stories, but we've come across a few that are really interesting, intriguing stories. Common people that are not so common. So let's start today. We're in one of the sections, one of the newer sections, a woman who passed in 2020. Beautiful woman, again, an intriguing picture. Claudina Reyes Candia. I came across her picture. She had the beehive hairdo back from the, what would that be, the 50s, the 60s. Just a beautiful woman and just such an interesting, I think it was the hairdo that caught my eye, and I just wanted to find out more about her. So let's start with her story and walk to her grave right over here. Of course, she was here in Arizona, and she had a rather large family. And there were a few things mentioned on the Find a Grave link that stood out. She was well loved by her friends and her family, and I believe a family member probably wrote this. She was the mother of 4 children, 16 grandchildren, and 13 great-grandchildren. What a legacy. The person said that Claudina was very feisty, funny, and girly. She loved music, she loved to dance, but most of all, she was loved by everyone. She was married to Ramon Ray Candia Jr. He passed away before Claudina. And interesting to note that her father, Claudio Reyes, he was a Mexican native and was serving in the U.S. Army when she was born. It's fantastic, isn't it? Here are their graves right here. And this is her husband, who looks like he, a sergeant in the U.S. Army. Ramon, thank you for your service. And Claudio, her father, thank you. And obviously not forgotten in this case. We've got flowers here and 2 hearts. So the family remembers. Forever in our hearts, Claudina Candia. May 14th, 1943. Yeah, right in the middle of World War II, guys. Passed July 14th, 2020, just under 4 years ago. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. Rest in peace, Claudina and Ramon. Rest in peace. Very interesting person in this section that we're going to visit. Francine Benson, her name. And she, of course, was from here, the Phoenix area. Very interesting picture of her from the 1940s. She was probably late teen, early 20s when this picture was taken. And that is what caught my eye to research with Deb a little bit more. Well, it really wasn't hard because the family left a lot of information on her Find a Grave link, and we'll look at that. Deb got a lot of pictures. We'll look at those too. And she had an amazing life, a real good person. Francine was born January 19th, 1927 in Fairview, Utah. She was the mother to 4, Larry, Jerry, Janelyn, and George. Grandmother to 23 and great-grandmother to many, probably uncountable almost. Not to mention a foster mother to several unwed mothers looking for comfort and guidance at a difficult time in their lives. Wow. I had a neighbor back in the Chicago area that did this, and you know, this is recently, mothers who were on drugs and addicts, and boy, that you've got to really give those people a lot of credit to do that. She would take in the babies, raise them, and then find a foster home they would find after they were a year or two old. Sometimes the mothers would be able to reclaim getting over their addictions. All right, we're heading to get to Francine's grave through a minefield of sprinklers. So let's not get too wet. What do you say? Reading on from the Find a Grave link, Francine was dedicated to her church throughout her entire life. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, she graciously accepted and diligently served in all of her church callings. I think we'll go this way, right between them. She spent many happy years as a teacher influencing children at Tavon Elementary School, where she carried on yearly traditions like reading favorite books about Native American Indians, encouraging the kids to try a bit of pie they made from squash, or sipping the stone soup they created as a class. She enjoyed her association with her teacher sorority, which was Alpha Delta Kappa. Her horizons were broadened as she traveled with good friends to explore many countries around the world. And when she came back, her arms were always full of unique gifts to pass around to family and friends. Her best friend in life was her sister, Lois Weipert, with whom she shared an unbreakable bond of love and support. They created a precious gift of sisterhood throughout their years that included sharing vacations, hours on the telephone, and the blessing of total acceptance. And the grave is right up ahead here. She's buried with her husband, who preceded her in death, Francine. Francine passed away peacefully March 4th, 2014 in her home, where she was lovingly cared for by her son, Jerry Benson. And here is where Francine lies peacefully with Stuart. Stuart passed in 1986. And Francine, and as I mentioned, in 2014, and they are reunited. Rest in peace, the Bensons. Amazing lives. Good people. Okay, we're going to visit the graves of a couple of World War II veterans who were killed in action, one from the Air Force, one from the Army, both in Europe, fighting Germany. Their graves are right over there. They're probably about 15-20 feet apart, so I thought we would cover both stories together. The first one is a man named Charles Bogan. He was the only son and youngest child born to Charles and Delia Bogan. And he enlisted into the service in 1943. He received most of his training at Camp Hahn, California and Camp Carson, Colorado. He went overseas to France. In August of 1944 to fight Germany, Charles participated in the Battle of Metz, France. That was one of the big battles, one of the many. It was fought from late September 1944 through mid-December as part of the Lorraine campaign, and it was led by none other than General George Patton, the famous George Patton. So Charles was right there. And amazingly, in the battle, Charles received a wound that was horrendous. He was close to, in a shell blast that took out part of his abdomen, part of his chest. It's amazing that he wasn't killed. And he did survive. He spent 4.5 months in a hospital in England recovering. And you know, you have to figure he was probably mostly recovered, but not fully recovered. And what did he do? He went right back into the battle, hooked up with his regiment of his brothers. And sadly, not 6 weeks later in France, he was killed in action. Not 6 weeks later. So you got to tip your hat, take your hat off for all those who have fallen in the wars, and those that lived on to carry the legacy. Just amazes me, and I feel so humbled to even tell their stories. He was awarded the Purple Heart, of course, before he was killed for that first injury, and the word here in this area, of course, in Phoenix, it was here his parents got the news and spread the word of everything that happened to Charles. Hats off. We're going to walk to his grave. The other one we did a lot of research, we found, who is buried, and this is a very interesting story of a B-24 Liberator pilot, William Acton. Now, William was one of 4 children born to George and Bertha Acton, who lived here in Arizona. William's father, George, was a deputy or sheriff of some kind. I looked at his Find a Grave and found a really interesting picture, which I'll show, of him sitting on the front fender of the automobile with a revolver and a badge. So you got to just wonder the stories. But William grew up. He married a Mabel Sarah Carner in April of 1927. They had a daughter, Billie Mae, who we did find pictures of. I have to say, sadly, could not find a picture of William anywhere. And we're going to get into the story of the liberator. There's lots of pictures. She was called Lucky Penny, and there's a book. Could not find any pictures of him, even in those pictures. Of course, he was on a fill-in crew. He wasn't on the main crew. We'll get into that in a little bit. But we did find a picture of Billie Mae, or pictures, so I will show that. And she was born in June of the same year. Unfortunately, her father was killed there. They were shot down, or it might have been the flak. I mean, the flak, you know the stories, was just brutal. So the bomber, like I said, was named Lucky Penny. She was part of the 453rd Bomb Group, which was in the 2nd Air Division of the 8th Air Force. They focused mainly on France and West Germany, doing all those missions. Again, early on, they didn't have fighter escorts from the English Channel to the targets, so they were just ripped apart by the Luftwaffe, and I think they feared more of the flak. The flak was just, you didn't know when it was coming, and as they sat there in their positions, watching the bombers around them just explode, and many with no parachutes coming out, just imagine the horror they had. Now, there were 2 others. So Lucky Penny there was 2 Lucky Pennies. The original Lucky Penny was shot down, and William Acton was with 2 other crewmates, did not survive. Sergeant Heron Angus Gill and Staff Sergeant Charles J. Pasica, they did not survive. The others, I believe, survived. So there's this book I was talking about. It's called Lucky Penny's Tale. And it's a really good book. It was written by a young man when he was young, after World War II. He was going, I think, to the gas station or the mechanics, and the old guy that was in there, he was a crewmate on Lucky Penny, and he would tell his story. And the guy's name, he was a tail gunner named Edmund Servilla. The book is really good. So I read the entire book, and I can recommend it because it just has from the beginning, but all the battles, chapter, 2-page chapters. It's hair-raising, hell-raising reading. As I went through it, I'm looking for William Acton. Well, I come to find out there's only 1 paragraph in the whole book, and doesn't even mention his name, doesn't even mention his crew. Here's what happened. The original Lucky Penny was that original crew the book was written about. When they were on furlough, I think for a month, the crew that took over, which William Acton was in, was shot down. Now, what bothers me, and again, the sentiment at the time, these guys loved their planes. They had their mechanic crews. It was just like the bond between the crew on the ground, and it was like their plane, take care of our baby. They'd wait for them to come back. The formations would come back crippled, and many of them, the planes never came back, and the crew would just be there alone. All of these stories. But Lucky Penny didn't come back, and they got a new bomber, brand new B-24 Liberator, and they, of course, painted Lucky Penny, and they took over, and they survived the war and didn't get shot down. But what bothered me, and again, you can understand the sentiment of the men, but the guy, the tail gunner on the original Lucky Penny, Edmund Servilla, really had a bad taste in his mouth. You read the paragraph in the book, and he basically says he blamed that crew for not taking care of Lucky Penny in so many words, metaphorically. He called them, those bastards lost our Lucky Penny. If we were on Lucky Penny, she wouldn't have been hit. Which was in the light of, you know, it's like karma. But I'm really disappointed that the author didn't go to the effort to at least identify the crew, and it was just really negative. Didn't even mention any of them, and they were. And it said they were all killed. They weren't all killed. I think most of them parachuted out, did survive, except for the 3. And we do have pictures of them, Herian Angus Gill and Staff Sergeant Charles J. Pasica. But not, if anyone out there, maybe family will see this, the Acton descendants. I would love to post a picture of William, just for history's sake. He's not in the book, he's not even mentioned. And it was really shocking for me to read that. It left a bad taste in my mouth. So it was written by that young man, and he was just listening to what the old man was saying. So at the same time, you can understand the sentiment. So let's walk to their graves right over here and pay our respects. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. Just imagine what these men went through. And also in the Pacific, just as bad. So we'll start with William Acton. His grave is right here. And, you know, as I look around here, this, I believe, is an area that is pretty much all veterans, although it's not marked, you know, with anything special. But as you look around, all of these graves are veterans. So here's his grave, William Acton, Arizona, Sergeant 453rd, World War II, October 1909 to May 1944. So hats off. Thank you for your sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, William J. Acton. And hopefully now you will be remembered. And let's see, we have over here, where was his grave? Charles. Charles is right here. Charles Bogan. And there you see Private First Class, 317th Infantry, 80th Infantry Division, World War II, March 21st, 1925, and March 28th, 1945. So just past his birthday, look at that. A week after his birthday, he was killed in action. How sad. And from what I understand, I'm checking with the cemetery, I think it took 4 or 5 years, because they haven't registered, I think, as 1949 or somewhere. It took a while to get Charles back here, and as you look around, it's probably the same for many of these young men who passed. You know, I look at the dates, and a lot of them are, well, a lot of them, 1948, there's 3 here, 1947, so this survivor of World War I, okay. I was thinking the Korean War and then they were killed, but no, it's all sorts. But we have 2 here that were killed in World War II. So that's their story. Rest in peace, Charles. Rest in peace, William, and all the veterans who paid the ultimate price. Okay, we've covered the Army, the U.S. Army. We've talked about the Air Force. Now let's talk about the Navy. I found a very interesting picture of a man. Turned out he served in the United States Navy, World War II Pacific Theater. His name, Foy Minter Carter. Very interesting picture, and digging deeper, very interesting story. He served pretty much through the entire war until the end of the war, and then after. He went by the name Jack, and he was married to a Betty Ann Miller, August 1948. And together they had 8 children, of course all after the war. The U.S. Navy career started for him, for Foy, in January 1942, and as I said, until through the whole war, in fact, until November of 1946. He served aboard a couple of destroyers, the USS Kendrick, which was a Benson-class destroyer. He was on the Kendrick, for just over a year, September 1942 to November 30th, 1943. It was on November 30th of 1943 that he joined the crew of the newly commissioned USS McDermott. Now, the USS McDermott was a Fletcher-class destroyer. As many of you know, you've heard of the Fletcher class. It was newly developed then, the beginning of World War II. It was the fastest and most deadly of its time. This was the tin can that dominated World War II, and we call the destroyers tin cans. It was fast, it was roomy, it was nimble, it could withstand an enormous amount of punishment, and yet would keep on fighting. It was some machine for its time. On the 10th of June, McDermott got underway for Saipan with the task force and pre-invasion bombardment duties. So let's talk about McDermott. She then steamed to Eniwetok, where she joined Task Force 53, and with that force bombarded the shore and then covered the landings at Guam. On July 22nd, she returned to Saipan-Tinian area for further fire support duties during the mopping up operations. By September 15th, she was in position off Peleliu to support the 1st Marine Division as it landed. Now let's talk about 1944 and the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Yeah, we're talking the Philippines. This was after, a big turning point of the war. The Leyte Gulf was kind of the key operation. MacArthur coming back, this would really be the pivotal point of the Pacific War, turning the war against the Japanese. It was brutal. It was the largest Navy battle in history, involving some 200,000 men. And let's talk about some brethren destroyers. Have you heard of Taffy 3? Probably one of my favorite stories in history. In fact, they just found the ships thousands of feet down, intact. Well, mostly intact. Taffy 3 consisted of 6 escort carriers screened by 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. Very famous operation protecting MacArthur's landings. And on October 25th, on those front lines, 1944, Taffy 3 was attacked by 4 Japanese battleships, 8 cruisers, 11 destroyers, which was led by the 18-inch guns armed by the battleship Yamato, the biggest battleship in the world. They were all bearing down on this little task force, Taffy 3. Now there were 3 destroyers, USS Hull, Herman, and USS Johnston. And the skipper on Johnston, my favorite story, Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. Evans. And I can tell you that their back was MacArthur, and they were the only thing in between the Japanese fleet and the landing forces of the Americans. And they went off. They charged head on with their little ships and their little torpedoes. And they went straight after while these battleships are pounding them with shells. They went right into it. Now the battleships were a little afraid. These destroyers coming straight at them is like torpedoes. That's not good. And after they were really damaged and all their torpedoes were gone, Ernest Evans charged again with no torpedoes and scattered the Japanese because they didn't know that his tubes were empty. And it was a suicide mission, but it was heroic. And the thing that I remember most is that one of the battleships was coming out, and Johnston was coming straight in again for the final bluff. And Evans was on the, like, standing out injured. They're all torn apart, half the crew's dead, and he salutes as the ship goes by. And all the men on the destroyer going out, I don't know if it was Hull or Herman, they were just like mouths open. And of course, they all, Evans died posthumously getting the Medal of Honor. Great story, but back to our destroyer. They were, with Foy Carter, they were right in the thick of all that. Just wanted to give you some color. So back to McDermott. They had entered the Leyte Gulf in the early morning of October 20th. And they were screening the transports as they approached Delag landing area. And they did their job. They warded off enemy planes. They rescued a lot of downed American pilots. That's what the destroyers, a big part of their job. And the submarines. Like they picked up George Bush after he was shot down in his TBM Avenger over, I think it was Chichijima, near Iwo Jima. But anyway, back to McDermott. On the night of October 24th, Rear Admiral Jesse B. Oldendorf deployed his forces for what was to be the last engagement, the battle line, the Battle of Surigao Strait. And the U.S. ships organized into eastern and western attack groups to launch offensive torpedo attacks as the Japanese were steaming up the strait, and McDermott was right there. They were assigned to the western group with USS Monson, and they were positioned close to the Leyte shore. After midnight, the enemy was reported coming down the strait, and between 0300 and 0301, the eastern group commenced launching torpedoes, firing 27 fish in less than 2 minutes. Now at 3:10, McDermott and Monson joined the fray. They launched their attack, and 0320, explosions. McDermott's torpedoes hit 3 destroyers, 3 Japanese destroyers. And they were drifting, disabled, and one of them had lost their bow, sinking. On January 11th, McDermott steamed into the Lingayen Gulf for shore bombardment duty, and they continued operations. Now, they went all the way to, through the war, island hopping with the task force, and ended up on Okinawa. And that was a bloody, bloody battle. And the problem with Okinawa were the kamikazes. That was the last resort, and every ship was getting pounded. And Foy Carter was there. He was on the ship, and we don't have any history on what his duties were. And I'll say right here, if descendants of the family see this, please, I'll post something. I would love to know more about his bravery. And I mean, he went through all of that. It's crazy. So Okinawa, they saw it through the end of World War II, and they were on occupation duty. And I think it was 1946, they came back, and that's when Foy, I think it was San Francisco, when he left the ship. And it was not long after that the ship was mothballed. Well, it was decommissioned, but it was on standby duty. So that is the story. We are going to walk to his father's grave. So get this. Foy is said to be here somewhere in the cemetery. I checked with the people. They don't know. He's not here. We found his father's grave, but not him. So again, if anybody can help us, family or otherwise, Foy Carter, I'll come back and post his grave. We can locate it on Find a Grave, but he should not be forgotten, and nobody knows where his grave is. So we'll go to his father's grave right now, and we'll mark that and close it out there. And here it is, the grave of Foy's father, Foy Carter, who was in World War I, you see here, passed in 1964. He was called Bonko, B-O-N-K-O, that was his nickname. Died at 73 years old. Hopefully, if anyone knows where Foy's son is, who served in World War II in the Navy on the tin cans, please write me facesforgottentoday@gmail.com, or just find us, and I would love to know more, and we could do a follow-up on Foy Jr. All right, that's it for today. Rest in peace to the Carters and all veterans who have served bravely, and those that serve today. Our hat is off to you. Thank you for your sacrifices.